We witnessed how a young country resisted the British Empire and gained its freedom. But gaining freedom was just the start. Now, America needed to prove itself. As the 19th century progressed, the country evolved from an agricultural society to an industrial giant. Railroads crisscrossed the country, factories hummed into action, and industrial giants formed the economy. But with advancement came new challenges. Would industry serve to unite the country or deepen the fractures of the past? The United States had gained its independence, but the true fight was only just starting. In the decades after its bitter victory, the country was at a crossroads. Would it continue to be a loose association of farm states, or would it become something more? The answer would not be found in war, but in industry. By the early 19th century, a quiet revolution had begun, one that would change America's destiny forever. The Industrial Revolution, already reshaping Europe, reached American shores with a force no one could have predicted. Factories emerged, steam engines roared to life, and machines replaced manual labor. The vast landscapes that had once been dominated by farms and small towns transformed into industrial hubs where steel, coal, and railroads fueled an economic explosion. Nowhere was this change more evident than in the emergence of the railroad. In 1869, when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, it connected the nation in ways that were previously unimaginable. Where once months-long travel had divided the East from the West, now an individual could travel across the entire nation in a few days. Goods traveled more quickly, industries grew, and America's vast resources, iron, wood, and oil, were more readily available than ever. Metropolises such as Chicago and Pittsburgh, which were once nothing more than outposts, became economic giants overnight. But it was not without cost. The Gilded Age, an era of unprecedented industrial expansion, brought with it the creation of monopolies that dominated industries. Giants such as John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie constructed giant empires in oil and steel, accumulating fortunes beyond imagination. Their dominance was unrivaled, their reach extending into politics, labor, and even the mundane lives of regular Americans. But behind the shiny veneer of economic prosperity lay a grim reality, one of the violent working conditions, child labor, and incessant exploitation. Factories were turned into sweatshops where the poor and immigrants worked for hours on end, barely scraping together enough to get by. America's industrial prowess pushed its European rivals far behind despite all this. Britain, the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, was now competing with its former colony in steel manufacture, innovation, and international trade. The United States had become a manufacturing powerhouse, producing more steel than Britain and Germany together. Electricity, a discovery that had once been thought to be magic, lit up American cities while the telephone and the assembly line transformed the way business was conducted with industry and ambition. The U.S. was no longer satisfied to expand within its borders. It wanted power overseas. The Spanish-American War of 1898 was America's first actual step onto the world stage, taking over territories such as the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam. No longer a separate nation, America was now an emerging empire, flexing its new industrial power beyond its borders. But power tends to breed war. As the 20th century dawned, the planet hung on the brink of history's first great war. Those same industries that had constructed America as an industrial giant would quickly be turned to purposes much more sinister. Would this industrial powerhouse continue its climb, or was it destined to face a challenge greater than ever before? America had evolved from a struggling new nation to an industrial giant, but this evolution had been founded upon steel, sweat, and a relentless desire to expand. Perhaps nowhere was this more apparent than in the expansion of the railroads. Before their existence, the immense American landscape had been separated by hostile terrain and remote communities. Travel and commerce were slow, horse and wagon dependent, and riverbound. But with the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad in 1869, everything changed. For the first time, people and goods could travel from sea to shining sea in a matter of days, triggering the explosive expansion of industries and cities. Towns that were once far-flung outposts were now thriving centers of business. Steel made all of this possible at lightning speed. The railroads used huge quantities of it, and one individual recognized the lifetime opportunity: Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie transformed the steel business by bringing the Bessemer process into play, a technique through which steel could be produced in bulk that was both strong and economical. His firm, Carnegie Steel, became the backbone of America's industrial era, providing steel for all, from railroads to skyscrapers. He was unrivaled in success, but so was his dominance. Carnegie was not the only industrial giant influencing the nation. John D. Rockefeller envisioned the future in oil. As the machines and factories came along, and finally, the automobile, oil was the lifeblood of industry in America. Rockefeller started Standard Oil and, by cutthroat business practices, amassed an empire that controlled 90% of the country's oil refining business. He mastered the science of monopoly, making deals with railroads, acquiring competitors, and bankrupting small businesses to suppress competition. Steel, oil, and railroads in the hands of powerful men meant that the American economy was no longer a free market, but a war zone where only the most cruel endured. Monopolies made unforeseen riches for men such as Carnegie and Rockefeller, but their achievement was achieved at the cost of millions of workers. Factories were demanding workplaces in which men, women, and even children worked long hours in hazardous conditions. 10-hour days, 6-day weeks, and meager wages were common. In steel mills, blast furnaces, and molten metal were constant hazards, while in refineries, lethal flames and poisonous vapors were hazards to workers' lives. The post-war industrial growth had transformed humble laborers into wheels in an enormous machine, replaceable at will and seldom safeguarded. As exploitation increased, so did the opposition. The late 19th century brought the establishment of labor unions, as laborers demanded reasonable pay, better working conditions, and the abolition of child labor. Walkouts broke out across the nation, some ending in bloody battles between employees and contracted strongmen. The Pullman Strike of 1894, sparked by wage reductions and skyrocketing rents in corporate-owned homes, brought the railroad industry to a standstill and prompted federal intervention. The American economy had become a battlefield of greed and power, with innovation and drive pitted against greed and suffering. By the late 19th century, the United States was no longer just a rising power. It had become an industrial titan, outpacing the very European nations that once overshadowed it. While Britain had pioneered the Industrial Revolution, and Germany had risen as a manufacturing powerhouse, America's ability to innovate, mass produce, and dominate key industries made it the new leader of the global economy. This transformation was driven by a perfect storm of ambition, technological breakthroughs, and an insatiable hunger for progress. One of the most defining forces behind America's industrial rise was its mastery of electricity. The late 1800s saw a battle of minds between two of the greatest inventors in history, Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla. Edison, known for developing the practical light bulb, envisioned a world powered by his direct current DC system. However, Tesla's alternating current AC, championed by industrialist George Westinghouse, proved to be the superior method for transmitting electricity over long distances. This war of the currents reshaped industry forever, as electricity lit up cities, powered factories, and revolutionized communication. No longer bound by daylight or steam power, American businesses could operate around the clock, leading to a surge in productivity. Yet, electricity was only part of the story. The true key to American dominance lay in its ability to outproduce its European rivals. While Britain and Germany had well-established industries, they lacked the sheer scale and efficiency of American factories. Innovations like Henry Ford's assembly line, introduced in the early 20th century, allowed the U.S. to manufacture goods at an unprecedented rate. What once took days or weeks to build could now be produced in hours. This method not only made products more affordable, but also solidified America's reputation as the most efficient industrial power in the world. With this surge in production, American goods flooded global markets, and their economic influence stretched across continents. But was the world impressed or alarmed? European nations saw America's rapid industrialization as both an opportunity and a threat. On one hand, American steel, oil, and machinery became essential for building modern economies. On the other hand, The sheer scale of U.S. production made European industries struggle to compete. Germany, in particular, viewed America's rise with unease, recognizing that economic power could soon translate into military power. This growing dominance fueled a new question. Was American industry leading the nation toward imperialism? With factories producing more than the domestic market could consume, businesses and politicians alike began to look outward. The Spanish-American War of 1898 was a turning point, as the U.S. seized territories like Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, expanding its global influence. American industry was no longer just about economic progress. It was now a tool for geopolitical power. As the 20th century approached, Europe was on the brink of war, and America's industries were producing at record levels. The world stood at a crossroads. The next chapter of history was already being written, not on battlefields, but in factories and boardrooms. America had emerged from a rural agrarian society to an industrial giant, but was the progress constructed on firm foundations or sand? The very forces that propelled its rise, innovation, expansion, and ambition, also kindled tensions that could not be resolved. As mills thundered and riches flowed, disparity widened, and new conflicts arose, not only in markets but in the streets, in politics, and in the nation's conscience. Would this new age of industry make America's dominance absolute, or would the divisions it forged make future conflicts even more severe? The gears of progress could not be halted, but neither could the hurricanes that they brewed.